picture this. The wind carried a tone like loss, deep, hollow, long. 3 silhouettes pressed forward across the white plain. The cold pushed into skin and memory without permission. The elderly Najoni Yazi guided them first, spine curved, spirit straight. At 55, she survived hunger, raids, and the slow vanishing of generations before her. She never survived love leaving, yet she carried it forward anyway. Her daughters followed like 2 small lanterns in a storm. Sophia Yazi stepped behind her younger sister, Lena Yazi. Their coats held what warmth time spared. Each footstep felt like a vote for survival. Each mile pushed arguments back at surrender. Settlers answered them with rifles more than suspicion. Doors answered them with silence. No space, no food, no bargaining for mercy. Najoni's voice once commanded storms, rivers, and crowded rooms, but weeks of pleading stole its strength. It turned hoarse, thin, rough, worn by disbelief of neighbors who wanted control without accountability. She spoke now only to the wind. She whispered to ancestors who answered in quiet. She promised not to let Sophia and Lena disappear into morning fog and frozen nights. In the distance, a thin signature of smoke curled up the grey sky. A cabin existed where desperation could interact with possibility. Inside, a man of 30 sat near a faint fire, sharpening a blade for work, not claims. He was a Jack Brennan, cowboy by trade, wanderer by nature. His beard carried frost of many winters and oil rig winds. His eyes carried the softness of someone who learnt loss too early. A photograph sat on the table beside him, his mother, forever smiling in a better time captured without edits. The storm outside hammered the walls like a determined visitor. It howled through gaps in the logs, like a restless voice testing boundaries. Then the knock arrived. It was firm, quick, raw. Fear and hope both live inside that knock. He paused, only long enough to ask himself one question. Is this real? Then he rose, pulled open the door, and faced the blizzard hidden. What he saw made the knife slip from his hand. 3 figures half buried in snow, eyes hollow yet defiant. The old woman's lips trembled. "No one gives a shelter," she said softly. Words nearly lost to the wind. The cowboy didn't ask where they were or why they had come. He simply stepped aside, his voice steady as a prayer. "Then you'll have shelter here." They entered quietly, as afraid kindness might vanish if they moved too loudly. The cabin filled with their breath, their shivers, their gratitude. He gave them bread soaked in warm broth, his own portion forgotten. The younger daughter smiled. Through chattering teeth, a fragile brighten threatening to her eyes. The elder stayed silent, her posture guarded, the what-if mistrust heavy from too many cruelties. The old woman murmured words in her native tongue. Hands shaking, Ars held them near the fire, blessing the warmth, blessing the stranger who had opened his door. For hours the storm raged outside, the walls trembling under its fists. Yet within, something soft stirred. The cowboy listened to their quiet stories, bits of laughter between pauses, songs hummed under breath, memories spoken in fragments. They told him how their tribe had been driven from Thriverlands, how they'd walked 4 days with nothing but faith. He didn't answer with pity. He listened the way earth listens to rain, silent, buteroceptive. When the old woman's eyes met us, she saw not a savior, but a son she might have once had. Night came heavy, pressing against the windows. The cowboy laid extra blankets beside their hearth. "The floor's cold," he said, "but fire's yours." He turned to mend Theora latch, but his mind lingered on Theora faces, the resilience etched into Thea. Cheeks, the quiet dignity even in exhaustion. When the women finally slept, he remained awake, staring in Tath's orange heart at the fire. His mother's words returned to him, soft and steady. Kindness is the only home a soul can build in this world. Outside, wolves shoaled in the distance, but they sound dead far away. Inside, peace held its ground. The cowboy's thoughts drifted between Marie and present, between what he'd lost and what had just arrived at his. He looked toward the sleeping figures. The old woman curled close toward daughters, their bodies drawn together, like a single thread of survival. Something in him eased. Something long frozen began to thaw. Bide on, the storm had spent itself. Through outside lay still, white, forgiving. The cowboy stepped to the door and opened it to the pale light. The air smelled clean, almost sacred. Behind him, the old woman stirred awake, her eyes following his silhouette, framed in the doorway. She whispered, very laudable, "You remind me of my son." He turned slowly, the words catching in his ears. "And you'll remind me of my mother." The fire crackled softly between them, echoing something older than both, something shared between every soul that's ever longed for shelter in a world too cold to care. And as the light spilled across the cabin floor, he felt it, an unseen shift, quiet but certain. Strangers had crossed his threshold in the storm, but by morning he was no longer alone. Yet outside the horizon steel glimmered with unfinished stories, and he couldn't shake the sense that this beginning was only the can be for another kind of storm. The snow began to melt in quiet surrender, retreating from the land like a ghost would finally found peace. The cabin that had once stood as a lonely outpost now breathed with life. Smoke curling from its chimney, laughter echoing faintly through its walls. The Apache woman moved gently through the space, her hands steady as she stirred the pot hanging over the fire. The smell of herbs and corn filled the air, earthy and warm. Her two daughters helped her with practiced rhythm, their movements a kind of unspoken music. The younger, quick with laughter, brought wildflowers inside each morning, pressing color back into a world that had forgotten it. The elder moved slower, quieter, her thoughts heavier than her steps. And the cowboy, the man who had deepened his door to them, watched their rhythm of their lives begin to blend with his own. He had lived years with hearing another voice in the mornings, without someone to share the silence of coffee and sunrise. Now, when he looked up from his work, there was Alwa Semyon there. Eob straying by the window, a soft hum rising from the old woman's throat, the sound of gentle feet moving over wooden floors. He found himself fixing things he hadn't cared about before. The crooked shelf, the squeaky hinge, the leaky roof, as do each nail and plank were an offering to this fragile piece. In the evenings, they sat together around the fire. The old woman spoke of her people's ways, of spirits that lived in rivers and stones, of the songs that healed. The Cowboy listened as though each word were a lesson the earth itself had been trying to teach him. The younger daughter laughed often, her jaw guarded, reminding him of a sisterhead lost to fever when he was a boy. But the elder, she was different. Huriz carried the weight of distance, even when she sat close. When she spoke, it was with thoughtfulness. As Suga's very word cost her something precious. One night, when the wind sighed through the cracks in the door, she asked him why he'd helped them. He thought for a long time before answering. "Because no one helped my mother," he said finally. "And I promised myself, if I ever met Samione in need, I'd be the door that stayed open." She looked at him for a long while, her face softened by their fire. Light and something unspoken passed between them, an understanding deeper than gratitude. It was the first time she smiled without fear. As spring crept closer, the land transformed. Rivers broke free from their icy cages. The soil breathed again, and life returned in small, defiant ways. Cowboy taught them to plant corn along the edge of the clearing, to mend fences, to ride the old mare that had been lonely in her pen. The elder daughter worked beside him, her hands frowning, her laughter hesitant betrayal. He found himself watching her more than he meant to. The way sunlight hoached her hair, the grace hidden beneath the scars of survival. The old woman saw it too. She would smile to herself, saying nothing, only whispering quiet blessings when neither of them noticed. The younger daughter teased her sister gently, and the elder would blush, pretending not to care. Yet as days lengthened, the air between her and the cowboy grew charged like a sky waiting for thunder. Then came the day of trial. A group of settlers rode through the valley. 4 men with faces as stone, searching for supplies, or perhaps something crueler. They saw 3 women outside the cabin, their Apache features catching the men's sneers like bite. Words were exchanged, ugly, bitter words that tasted of hatred. The cowboy stepped out, his revolver resting loose at his side. His voice was calm, but there was iron in it. "They're under Mirov," he said, his stance unyielding. "You'll show them respect, or you'll Ridian." The men stared at him, measuring his resolve. One spat in the dirt, muttered a curse, and turned his horse. The others followed, their scorn trailing bent them like dust. The silence they left was heavy, filled with the echo of what could have been. The old woman's eyes glistened with tears she didn't try to hide. She reached out and laid her weathered hand on the cowboy's arm, a blessing without words. In that moment, something sacred settled in the space between them all. A covenant of trust born not of blood, but of shared courage. That night, the elder daughter stood with him outside beneath Thestas. The air was cool, fragrant with scent of thawing earth. "You didn't have to stand for us," she said quietly. He shook his head. "Yes, I did." She looked at him, then really looked, and for the first time saw not a stranger, not a savior, but a man, flawed, kinder-human, her heart long frozen. In fear began to thaw. They stood close, silence blooming between them like wild flowers after rain. No words could have carried the weight of that moment. The fire from inside flickered across their faces, and when their hands brushed, neither pulled away. The touch was small, almost accidental, yet it carried the force of her promise. One neither dared to speak aloud. The old woman watched them from the doorway, the firelight behind her turning her hair to silver flame. She smiled softly and whispered to the night, the creator her strange ways of giving back what was lost. When dawn came, it found them still standing together beneath the cottonwood tree, the same place where the cowboy had buried his mother. A single blossom had a pen on its branch, delicate against early light. The elder daughter reached out and touched it, her fingers trembling. Spring came after all, she murmured. He looked at her, and something in him settled, a lifetime of loneliness easing into belonging. Thekabin, once a shelter against the storm, had become a home. Yet, in the hush of that moment, as birds stirred, awakened first warmth of morning kissed Theplan's, a quiet truth unfolded between them. Love once found asks to be protected just as fiercely as life itself. And far beyond the horizon, Duind began to rise again.